A wine bottle shatters against a woman's head in the middle of a luxurious party in Miami Beach. Blood mixes with red wine, and screams tear through the festive air. Everyone is paralyzed, and the perpetrator is none other than her powerful husband, admired by all. But he can't imagine that the woman he believed to be weak, Clara Mason, will be the one to bring down his entire empire. From victim to a symbol of justice, Clara will unearth the darkest, most rotten secrets. Love, betrayal, power, and redemption collide in a ruthless story. And trust me, the final twist will leave you breathless until the very last second. Will Clara get justice, or will his power silence her forever? Leave your comment, hit the like button, and subscribe for more stories that will shake you to your core. Amid the golden lights of the South Beach Gala, everyone believed Clara Mason had the perfect life until the glass broke. In the brightest part of the year in Miami, the air smelled of ocean spray and fine wine. Adorned horses trotted down the avenue, and tents burst with music and laughter. Inside the Fontainebleau Hotel, the marble gleamed under the chandeliers. Waiters crossed the room with glasses of Merlot and trays of imported cured meats. The partners of the Vega group smiled for the cameras. Clara, wearing a midnight blue gown and a discreet necklace, walked beside her husband, Alexander Vega, the admired businessman. He held her arm with elegance, as if the contact were a display of affection and not control. In that brilliance was hidden the silence of years, a marriage that seemed solid, but was a polished cage. A year ago, Clara had promised her mother never to cry over love again. She remembered that promise like a hot thread in her chest, while pretending to enjoy the cocktail party. Guitar music softly swelled, and among the conversations, names of senators and bankers were heard. Alexander greeted everyone with the impeccable smile of a man who never makes a mistake. Clara drank water, observing the details, the reflections of the wine on the glass, the fresh flowers in the silver vases. Then, amidst the murmur, she saw a face that gave her a sense of breath. Diego Ramos, her former college classmate, a journalist, sincere and curious, approached with a frank smile and an invisible bouquet of memories. "Clara, I never imagined seeing you here," he said. She replied with a half-smile. "Diego, Miami doesn't change, but we do." The phrase floated between them like an old perfume. Alexander watched them from a few yards away, his glass in hand, his expression frozen. Diego spoke about his work, about the city, a report on women architects, and how he would have loved to interview her. Clara laughed softly, unaware of the fire growing behind her. Alexander took a long drink. The wine stained his lips. His jaw tightened. When Diego said goodbye with a handshake, Alexander approached with a smile that had an edge. "What a surprise, darling. Running into friends," he said, and she replied without thinking. "We were just talking." "Of course," he replied in a low voice and a false calm. "I just want to know if you had fun." "We were just talking," she repeated. "Just talking?" he insisted, and his tone was no longer kind. "Don't you dare humiliate me," he added, barely audible. Clara gently pulled her hand away, trying to downplay it, but he held her by the elbow, squeezing. "You're hurting me," she whispered. "Smile," he ordered without letting go. The music started again. The guests moved around, oblivious, and Clara pretended everything was fine, that the pressure didn't exist. She thought of her mother, of the promise, of dignity. She took a step back, needing air. "I'm going to the patio for a moment," she said. Alexander replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll go with you," They went out into the side hallway, where a mirror reflected the ballroom lights. A waiter passed nearby, and Alexander asked him for another bottle. He opened it with a sudden gesture. The sound of the cork was like a warning. "I don't want to argue here," Clara said, trying to keep her voice low. "I'm not arguing," he replied, pouring himself more wine. "I just want to know if you had fun. Don't say his name like that." He spat. Clara's gaze broke, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She tried to step away, but he followed her. A group of guests crossed the hallway, laughing, without looking. Everything remained the same in the ballroom. Laughter, glasses, applause. No one saw the shadow growing in the corner. Alexander put down the glass and held the bottle by the neck. "Do you think you can ridicule me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Clara stepped back. Her heel slipped slightly on the marble. "You're drunk. Let's talk tomorrow." "Don't tell me what to do," he yelled in a burning whisper. The echo of his breathing filled the air. Diego, from a distance, noticed something and advanced through the crowd. But it was too late. Alexander raised the bottle just a few inches, enough for the light to reflect off the glass. Clara opened her mouth to say his name, but the gesture froze. The blow was sharp, brutal, final. The glass exploded into 1,000 pieces. The music stopped. A murmur of horror swept through the ballroom. Blood poured from her temple, ran down her cheek, and stained her gown. A waiter dropped a tray. A woman screamed. "My God!" The sound mixed with the crash of broken glasses. Alexander stumbled back, still holding the neck of the bottle, his eyes vacant. Clara staggered. She tried to lean on the wall, but the world spun. She fell to her knees. Everything became confused. The metallic taste in her mouth, the dancing lights, the cold sensation on the floor. Mrs. Eleanor Vega, Alexander's mother, ran toward her, pushing aside chairs, screaming, "Call an ambulance, quickly!" Mr. Mateo Vega, Alexander's father, barked orders, but his voice was lost in the panic. Diego arrived, kneeling beside Clara, pressing a napkin on the wound. "Stay with me. Don't go to sleep," an off-duty hotel nurse told her as they tried to stop the bleeding. Clara could barely hear. She only perceived the crowd's murmur and the non-existent music's buzz. The ballroom doors burst open. Paramedics entered. The smell of alcohol and expensive perfume mixed with the scent of blood. One of them said, "Miami General Hospital, urgent!" They placed Clara on a stretcher. Her face was pale, her lips parted. Alexander didn't move. He looked like a soulless statue. Eleanor turned to him and murmured, in a voice that was half sob, half reproach, "You've repeated history." No one understood, except her. The stretcher moved down the hallway. Heels resonated against the marble. Phone flashes began to light up the scene. Outside, the Miami night continued to burn with the lights of the gala, the sky covered with lights and music, as if the world hadn't stopped inside that ballroom. The silence in the corridors of Miami General Hospital weighed heavier than the pain in her head. Clara slowly opened her eyes. The white clarity of dawn scratched her pupils, and she felt a dry stab in her temple. The constant beep of a machine marked the rhythm of her breathing. Outside, in the hospital cafeteria, the distant sounds of cups, spoons, and conversations about sports were heard. The world went on. Nurses came and went, weariness in their eyes. Doctors checked papers. And yet, for her, time had stopped on that night. Alexander's voice still echoed in her head, repeated like a whisper. "No one has to know." She closed her eyes for an instant, bit her lip, and murmured without a sound. "I will remember." A nurse entered with soft steps, left a tray, and said with a warm accent, "Good morning, beautiful. I'll bring you a coffee if they let me." Clara offered a mechanically polite smile. She liked that normalcy, the way the nurse spoke about her son, her local team, and how badly she slept because of the gala still in her head. Those ordinary words were like an anchor, a promise that life hadn't disappeared. Outside, the sky was turning a clear blue, and through the open window came the scent of ocean air, a mixture of sweetness and melancholy. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. It was Diego Ramos, the journalist, the friend from another time. He didn't bring flowers, just a notebook and a tired gaze. "I came early not to bother," he said in a low voice. "But I needed to see you awake." Clara looked at him, barely nodded, and settled in bed. "I appreciate you coming," she replied. Diego approached, placed a small card on the table. "Here's my number. If you ever want to tell your story, I'll be there. And if not, I'll be here too." She looked down at her hands, so cold, so alien. "I don't know if I want to talk," she murmured. Diego sighed and added, "Sometimes talking isn't about telling. It's about starting to breathe." She then remembered the memory card she had hidden under her pillow. She took it out, held it between her fingers, and placed it in Diego's palm. "Keep it," she said. "Don't look at it yet." He took it without asking questions. "I promise to protect it," he replied. A brief silence enveloped them. Outside, a cleaning cart rolled down the hallway, and the sound of the wheels on the polished floor was like a clock ticking reality. When Diego left, Mrs. Eleanor entered, dressed in beige, her face pale, her lips tight. She closed the door carefully and approached without speaking. Her eyes filled with contained tears. "I shouldn't have come, but I can't stay silent," she said. Clara watched her cautiously. She didn't know whether to hate her or pity her. "Mateo is with the lawyers," Eleanor continued. "They want to prepare a statement. They will say it was a domestic accident." Clara clenched her teeth. The bandage on her head throbbed. "And what will you say?" she asked. The woman swallowed, the years weighing in her voice. "I was you once, daughter. I also learned to smile when my body hurt, but I can't keep looking the other way anymore." She sat by the bed, took her hand, and said slowly, "Don't make my mistake. Don't let them silence you." For a moment, neither spoke. The ticking of a clock and the distant sound of an elevator were heard. Eleanor took a small key from her purse and left it on the bedside table. "It's from my old apartment in South Beach," she said. "No one goes there. If you ever need to leave, that will be your refuge." Clara looked at her with silent gratitude. The woman stood up, and before leaving she added, "If you decide to speak, you won't be alone." The room phone rang a few minutes later. It was her mother, Rosa, from Tampa. The voice on the other end sounded strong and nervous. "Daughter, how are you? Your father hasn't slept since last night. Tell me the truth." Clara closed her eyes. She imagined Antonio's calloused hands, the smell of wood, the small house with the shutters open to the ocean. "It was an accident, Mom," she lied. There was a long silence, like a sigh, and then her mother said, "I'm taking the train tomorrow. I'm bringing you soup, oranges, and bread." "You don't have to," Clara replied. "Yes, I do," her mother insisted, and hung up. Clara put down the receiver. She kept looking at the phone, knowing that lie would protect her for only a short time. The day continued its rhythm. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked her history. The sun crossed the window and drew a rectangle of light on the bedspread. Clara asked for paper and a pen. The nurse brought her a cheap blue-covered notebook and a half-dry pen. Clara wrote the date, the time, and a phrase. It was not an accident. Then she described what she remembered. Every sound, every word, the blow, the smell of wine, the choked scream of a woman. She noted the names of those who were nearby, the times, the reactions. When she finished, she put the notebook under the pillow, as if it were a new heart beating strongly. In the afternoon, as the sky turned golden, she turned on her phone and opened the voice recorder. Her voice, weak but firm, broke the air in the room. "My name is Clara Mason. I am in the Miami General Hospital. What happened was not an accident. It was a blow. There were witnesses. I am not seeking revenge. I just want no one else to have to live in fear." She ended the recording. She saved it with the name First Voice. She rested her forehead against the window glass. In the patio, the trees dropped flowers onto the benches. She listened to the murmur of visitors, the distant singing of a street vendor. For an instant, peace seemed possible. She thought of her mother, of Diego, of the South Beach key that gleamed on the bedside table. She closed her eyes. She swore to herself that that recorded voice would be the beginning of something. The clock marked 9 when the nurse entered to check the IV. "Are you sleepy, beautiful?" she asked. "A little," Clara replied, smiling. The woman turned off the main light, leaving the small lamp on. "Rest. Tomorrow will be another day." When the door closed, the room was enveloped in shadow. Clara turned her head toward the hallway. Something changed in the air. A slight creak on the doorknob. The crack let in a shadow, a familiar perfume. Her blood ran cold. She pretended to be asleep. The hinges barely squeaked. Slow, contained footsteps stopped right on the other side. The heart monitor maintained its serene rhythm. Outside, someone was breathing. The following night, the hospital slept under a thick silence, broken only by the metallic echo of a cart and the rhythmic beep of the machines. Clara Mason pretended to sleep, but her eyes were open in the darkness. In her chest, her heart kept a restless beat, and in the crack of the door filtered a shadow that shouldn't be there. She recognized that sour perfume of expensive cologne, the same one that permeated Alexander's clothes. The door opened just a crack. The sound of the doorknob turning made her hold her breath. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute. Then, a low, broken voice, almost a whisper. "Clara, I know you're awake." She remained motionless. "I just want to talk," he insisted. His tone was different, no longer that of the haughty businessman, but of a man walking on the edge of fear. "I don't want to see you," she replied without moving. "Leave before I call someone." Alexander took a step inside. His shoes echoed on the polished floor. "Please," he said. "You don't understand. I went crazy. I didn't mean to do it." Clara turned her head toward him, and with a sharp voice replied, "Yes, you did." Those two words fell like broken glass to the floor. Alexander looked down. He rubbed his forehead with his hand. The deep, dark circles made him look like an old man. "Your father is going to report me," he murmured. "Diego spoke to the police." Clara gripped the sheet between her fingers, instantly understanding that her friend had acted on instinct, perhaps prematurely. Alexander moved a little closer, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I don't want to go to prison," he said. "Mateo says everything can be fixed if you sign a document, a private settlement." Clara watched him, the white bandage on her forehead throbbing to the rhythm of her anger. "A settlement to be silent?" she asked. "I won't sign it. Not this time." Alexander swallowed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "I swear I regret it, Clara. I'm destroyed. I don't know who I was that night." She slowly sat up, the pain in her head mixed with the pain of his words. "You were you, the same as always. Only this time, everyone saw you." The man backed up a step. He looked around, fearing someone might hear him. "Please, don't sink me," he said. "If you report me, my father will disown me. I'll lose everything." Clara looked at him fixedly and replied, You already lost it." A distant sound of footsteps interrupted them. Alexander turned, quickly left the room, and disappeared down the hallway. Clara remained seated, her pulse racing, tears held back in her eyes. A few minutes later, the nurse entered, noticing nothing, with a tired smile. "Everything okay, beautiful?" she asked. Clara nodded silently. When the woman left, she took a deep breath and looked for her phone. She dialed a number. Diego answered immediately. "He came," she said in a low voice. "He entered the room." Diego cursed in a whisper. "He shouldn't have. Did his parents know?" "I don't know," Clara replied. "But he's desperate, and he talked about a settlement." Diego noted something. "Listen to me, Clara. A police detective will come tomorrow to talk to you. Confirm everything. Don't sign anything. And if they approach you again, hit the emergency button." Clara closed her eyes. The weight of fear was sinking her into the bed. But beneath the fear was an older, firmer strength, the need to end everything. End. At dawn, the hospital filled with movement. A doctor checked her vitals. An orderly changed the sheets. On the television, the headlines showed a photo of Alexander Vega inaugurating a charity project months ago, under the title, "Exemplary Businessman." Clara looked away. Detective Navarro arrived before noon, a dark-haired woman, about 40, with a serene gaze and a deep voice. "I'm Detective Navarro," she said upon entering. "I know it's been difficult, but I need you to confirm the facts." Clara recounted everything, word for word, without drama, without omitting details. When she finished, the detective closed her notebook and said, "You have a lot of courage." "No," Clara replied. "I just got tired of being afraid." The woman left her card. "As of today, you are under protection. You will not sign any paper without my presence." In the afternoon, Eleanor returned. Her face was drawn and her eyes were swollen. She sat down in silence and said, "My son came last night." "I know. I'm sorry." Clara didn't reply. Eleanor continued, "I spoke with Mateo. He wants to send you money, a settlement to close this." "I don't need his money," Clara replied. "I need justice." Eleanor nodded slowly. The trembling of her hands betrayed an internal conflict. "If you speak," she said quietly, "not only will Alexander sink, the whole family will sink. But maybe that's what's needed." She stood up, kissed Clara's forehead, and added, "I will go wherever you go." When the sun set over Miami, Clara's room filled with golden light. In the hospital patio, the shadows of the trees stretched over the tiles. Diego visited her again at dusk, with a determined look. "I've reviewed the video," he said. "It's all there. The blow, the screams, the guest's reaction. There's no way to cover it up." Clara listened in silence. "Then there's no turning back," she murmured. "There never was," he replied. She rested her head on the pillow, tired, but more awake than ever. "When I leave here, I want to go back to my parents' house," she said. Diego nodded. "And after that?" "After that, I'll see what to do with my life, but this time it will be mine." In the window, the lights of Miami flickered, small and alive, as if the whole city were breathing with her. The nurse came in one last time to adjust the IV. "Does anything hurt?" she asked. "No," Clara replied. "Not anymore." She closed her eyes, and the sound of the city mingled with the constant rhythm of the monitor. Meanwhile, in a corner of the hallway, Alexander watched the door of the room without daring to enter, his face haggard and his hands trembling. He knew that something was broken forever. Justice, like the dawn, was beginning to filter through the cracks of fear. And Clara, finally, slept in peace. The dawn brought a new, almost clean clarity over the hospital. Clara Mason woke up with the feeling of having slept through the night for the first time without being startled. Her head still ached, but the weight inside her chest seemed to have lightened. On the bedside table was still Detective Navarro's card, a piece of paper that now represented something more than a promise. It was a dividing line between fear and freedom. The nurse came in with her usual smile. "You look better today, beautiful," Clara replied with a calm gesture. "I feel better today." That, "I feel," was a small but powerful declaration. Outside, the sun bathed the patio trees, and the smell of toasted bread came from the cafeteria. For the first time, the world seemed to be moving in her favor. Mid-morning, Diego Ramos arrived with an envelope in his hand. He was dressed simply, without the professional air of previous days. "I bring news," he said, as he placed the envelope on the bed. Clara looked at him cautiously. "The police have the video." The detective confirmed it. "They've submitted it as evidence." Clara gripped the sheets, a surge of relief and fear at the same time. "And Alexander?" Diego sighed. "He disappeared last night. His father says he traveled to Lisbon, but the police believe he's trying to buy time." Clara closed her eyes for a moment. Alexander's name was still a live wound. "He can't escape what he did," she finally said. Diego nodded. "No, and this time, no one will be able to cover it up." The rest of the morning passed calmly. Eleanor arrived shortly after noon, more aged than ever. In her eyes was resignation and shame. "Clara," she began, "my husband is furious. He says you betrayed him, but I haven't. I'm with you." Clara observed her in silence, trying to decipher if her words were guilt or redemption. "I don't want revenge," she said slowly. "Only the truth." Eleanor nodded and took a small envelope from her purse. "Here's something that will help you." Inside was a copy of a contract, money transfers, bribes, a network that linked the Vega Group to shady dealings. Clara read it without breathing. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked. "Because I'm no longer afraid of my husband," the woman replied. "And because if everything comes out, the Vega name will fall with its complete truth." Clara hid the envelope under the blanket, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions. That afternoon, Detective Navarro returned. She had an air of discretion and weariness, but also determination. "Clara," she said as she closed the door, "the prosecutor wants your formal testimony. It won't be easy, but if you do it, everything will change." Clara took a deep breath. "I'll do it. I don't want to hide anymore." Navarro explained the steps, the dates, the procedures. "You will have protection. You are not alone," she added before leaving. That night, Clara ate slowly, thinking of her mother. She imagined Rosa preparing soup in the kitchen, her apron stained with flour, looking at the clock and telling her husband that their daughter would soon be home. That image sustained her, like an invisible hug. She took the blue notebook from under the pillow and wrote, "The truth begins here." Then she noted the names of everyone who had been at the party. Guests, staff, photographers. She remembered the faces, the murmurs, the way people looked away when the bottle broke. She didn't blame them. They were all afraid. But she had decided to break that cycle. Sometime in the early morning, she fell asleep. She dreamed of the Gulf Coast, of the salty wind hitting the rocks, of her mother waiting for her on the porch. When she woke up, the dawn was already gilding the sky, and a new sense of purpose pushed her to move. She rang the call button. "I want to get up," she told the nurse. With help, she took the first steps out of bed, her bare feet on the cold floor. "Little by little," the woman murmured. Each step was an affirmation. an act of return. Hours later, when Navarro returned with the testimony papers, Clara was already sitting by the window. The detective observed her and said, "You look like a different person." "I'm the same," Clara replied. "I'm just not afraid anymore." She signed the documents, one after another, with a steady hand. Navarro put the sheets in her folder and smiled. "You've just opened the door to something bigger than yourself, maybe for many women." Meanwhile, on the other side of Miami, Alexander was hiding in a dark apartment rented with his father's money. His beard was grown out, his eyes sunken, his suit wrinkled. The television was on, the volume low. The news mentioned a woman injured at a gala. They didn't say her name, but the story was his. He angrily hit the table and broke the glass he held in his hand. "You won't destroy me," he muttered. However, the inner voice that had always supported him had vanished. For the first time, as the afternoon fell, Clara received a call from Tampa. "You'll be home tomorrow," Rosa said in an emotional voice. "Your father painted the room and hung the new curtains." Clara laughed for the first time in days. "Thank you, Mom." She hung up and kept looking out the window. The city was turning orange, and shadows stretched across the patios. Diego arrived a few minutes later with a folder under his arm. "I'm taking you to the train tomorrow," he announced. "The detective says everything is in motion. Alexander will be arrested as soon as he crosses the border." Clara nodded. "And the Vega group?" "Mateo has resigned. The scandal is growing. What you provided, along with his wife's documents, changed everything." The air in the room filled with calm. "Then it's true," Clara said. "The truth has weight." Diego looked at her with a mixture of respect and tenderness. "And you have more strength than you imagine." She looked down, thoughtful. "Strength doesn't come from hate," she murmured. "It comes from remembering that I still have a family waiting for me." When the daylight was gone, the hospital was in shadow. Clara closed her eyes, with the distant rumor of cars, and her heart at rest. For the first time since the blow, she didn't dream of fear, but of the sea, of a maternal voice calling her home, and of the promise that life, though broken, could still be mended. The train to Tampa departed under a clear sky, with the sun filtering through the windows and the constant rumble of the tracks accompanying every thought. Clara Mason looked out the window, watching the sunflower fields stretch out like a golden sea until they disappeared on the horizon. She wore a scarf covering her head, the bandage already removed, but there was still a fine, almost invisible mark on her temple. It wasn't a wound. It was a reminder. Diego sat across from her, reading the newspaper. "The Vega case is already in all the headlines," he said without looking up. 3 executives and a lawyer have been arrested." Clara nodded in silence. "And Alexander." Diego looked at her for an instant, then lowered his voice. "He turned himself in this morning in Lisbon. He's being extradited in a few days." She didn't know what to feel. Not joy, not revenge, only a strange calm. The sensation that time, finally, had started moving again. When the train arrived in Tampa, the salty air enveloped her. It was the smell of her childhood, the smell of long afternoons and warm bread on the table. Her parents were waiting for her on the platform. Rosa ran toward her with open arms. "My baby," she said through tears. Antonio, her father, hugged her with silent strength, the kind that needed no words. "You're home," he murmured. The walk to the small house in the neighborhood was like a journey to the past. The whitewashed facades, the balconies with flower pots, children playing ball in the street. Everything was the same, but Clara had changed. In the kitchen, Rosa prepared soup and toast with oil, just like when Clara was little. "You need to eat well, daughter," she repeated, while making sure she didn't get tired. Antonio sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the folded newspaper on the table. "Is that what that man did to you?" he asked in a deep voice, without looking up. Clara nodded. The lump in her throat prevented her from speaking. Her father exhaled sharply. "If I had been there—" "Don't say that," Rosa interrupted. "It's already in the hands of justice." But in Antonio's eyes, there was something that wouldn't fade. The impotence of a father who couldn't protect his daughter. That night, Clara went out to the patio. The sky was full of stars. The sound of the ocean arrived softly. She sat in an old chair with a blanket over her legs and listened to the echo of the wind between the alleyways. In the window opposite, a neighbor played a soft tune. The neighborhood life, the kind that never disappears. Diego called her by phone. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she replied. "I just needed to breathe again. Detective Navarro wants to talk to you tomorrow. She wants to close the report." Clara looked at the stars and said, "I'll be ready." The next morning, she went to the small corner cafe where she used to read when she was young. The owner, a kind man, recognized her immediately. "Clara Mason, Antonio's daughter. I haven't seen you in ages." "I've been away," she said. "You look thinner. I'll make you a coffee like the old days." She sat by the window, watching the light fall on the facades. She opened the blue notebook she had carried with her. On the first page was still the phrase, "It was not an accident." Below it she wrote, "And it was not the end." Navarro arrived on time at the cafe. She was dressed in civilian clothes, with a light coat and sunglasses. She sat across from Clara and ordered tea. "The judge has approved protective measures. Alexander won't be able to approach you or communicate in Itzama in any way," she explained calmly. "The rest now is up to you. You can testify in person or record a statement." Clara thought for a few seconds. "I'll go to court," she said. "I don't want to hide." Navarro nodded with a slight smile. "You have more courage than many." That afternoon, returning home, Rosa was waiting for her with a letter in her hand. It arrived by courier, with no return address. Clara opened it. Inside, a folded paper with trembling handwriting. "Forgive me." There was no signature, but none was needed. Alexander. She felt a twinge of pain, not of love, but of compassion. "Your forgiveness is useless to me now," she murmured. She folded it and put it in the lit fireplace. The paper shrank, turned to ash, and the patio wind carried it away. At nightfall, the neighborhood filled with voices and lights. It was Saturday, and in Tampa, there is always music to chase away the silence. Antonio took out a bottle of wine. Rosa served fried fish. Neighbors came over to say hello. "Welcome back to the neighborhood, daughter," a woman shouted from the balcony. Clara smiled. "Thank you," she replied. The air smelled of salt, laughter, normal life. After dinner, Diego called again. "I saw you in the news," he said. "People are starting to talk about you as a symbol of bravery." Clara laughed, incredulous. "I'm not a symbol of anything, just a tired woman who wanted to live again." "That's bravery too," he replied. There was a comfortable silence between them, broken only by the sound of the waves. "When all this ends," Diego said, "you have to write it down, not for the newspaper, but for yourself." Clara looked at her blue notebook on the table. "I already started," she replied. That night, before going to sleep, Rosa came to her room. "You know," she said, "when you were little and you were afraid, you would look at the ocean from the window. You always said the sea talked back to you." Clara smiled. "The sea always listens." Her mother hugged her, and for a moment all the pain was reduced to the size of a sigh. When she was alone, Clara opened the window. The rumor of the Atlantic filled the room. In the distance, A lighthouse beam rotated, constant, watchful. Inside her, there was no longer resentment, only a deep calm. She lay down in bed, closed her eyes, and as the wind moved the curtains, she thought of the women who were still silent, of those who would one day raise their voices. Her lips moved in a barely audible murmur, for all of us. And so, with a calm heart and the sea as her witness, she fell asleep under the Tampa sky, knowing that the beginning of her new life had just begun. The dawn in Tampa unfolded over the ocean like a sheet of liquid gold. Clara Mason woke up to the sound of seagulls and the constant murmur of waves hitting the breakwater. The air had a clean, salty, almost medicinal freshness. She got up slowly, opened the shutters, and let the breeze come in. "Good morning, daughter," Rosa said from the kitchen, scrambling eggs for the omelet. "You look different today. Your face is brighter." Clara smiled. "It's the ocean, Mom. It always heals." Rosa nodded without stopping stirring the pan. "And the soul, too," she added with that silent wisdom that only mothers who have seen too much possess. After breakfast, Clara went out for a walk on the beach. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose, and dark glasses. Every step on the sand reminded her of something about herself that she thought was lost. In the distance, a group of children played with a ball, laughing without fear. She stopped for a moment to watch them and thought about everything she had endured, everything she had kept silent. In her mind echoed Detective Navarro's words, "Your testimony can change everything." That phrase had become a lighthouse. Returning to the town, she crossed the main square, where the air smelled of coffee and freshly baked bread. The cafe owner, the same one from her youth, greeted her with a friendly gesture. "Clara, I've already saved your table." "Thank you, Joe," she replied with a smile. She sat in her usual corner, where she could watch life pass by without being seen. She opened the blue notebook and wrote, "The truth does not always liberate, but it always cleanses." At the next table, two older women were talking about the news everyone was discussing. "They say that brave woman is going to testify in Miami," one said. "I hope she does, so the powerful bleed too," the other replied. Clara looked down. She didn't want to be anyone's hero. She just wanted to close a chapter. In the afternoon, Diego called her. "The judge wants you to testify in person. The date is set for 3 days from now," he informed her seriously. "I'll pick you up and go with you. Navarro will also be there." Clara took a deep breath. "It's fine. I'll go." Diego hesitated for a few seconds before adding, "Alexander will ask to testify the same day." There was a long silence. "Then it will be the end," Clara murmured. "Yes," he replied, "but the end is also a beginning." That night, the house filled with neighbors. Rosa had prepared a simple dinner, but the air smelled of celebration. Antonio, her father, took out a guitar, and the neighborhood children ran around laughing. Clara watched them from the window, holding a glass of white wine. Diego arrived later, with a notebook under his arm and the same serene expression as always. "I'm not here for work," he said. "I just wanted to see you before everything." They sat in the patio, under a garland of small lights. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I have respect, but not fear." "That is stronger than courage," Diego murmured. They talked for a long time, about childhood, about what would come next, about life that continued without asking permission. Clara listened to him, feeling that the pain was beginning to transform into something lighter, a kind of understanding. "Do you know what my mother told me last night?" she commented. "That the ocean always talks back. And I think she was right, because every time I get close, something inside me calms down." Diego looked at her tenderly. Perhaps the sea knows what it's like to break and come back together. When he left, Clara returned to her room and opened the window. The moon shone high, reflecting on the Atlantic. She thought about Alexander, about what he would say, about how she would look at him without trembling. There was no hatred, only a definitive distance. Inside her remained an echo of compassion, because she understood that he had never known how to love without possessing. But love, she told herself, is not measured by control, but by freedom. The next day, very early, Detective Navarro arrived by car at the house. She was dressed soberly, with her hair pulled back. "Ready?" she asked from the doorway. "Ready?" Clara replied. She got into the car with a new serenity. Rosa said goodbye from the door, with contained tears. "Do the right thing, daughter. What your heart tells you." "I will, Mom." The trip to Miami was silent, interrupted only by the sound of the tires on the highway. Diego was waiting for them at the courthouse. He carried the recorder and a contained expression. "Everything is prepared," he said. "There's press outside, but Navarro has arranged security." Clara nodded, without taking her eyes off the entrance door. When she crossed it, she felt the weight of all the eyes, all the judgments, all the years she had fallen. But she also felt a deep clarity. She hadn't come to cry. She had come to tell the truth. Inside the courtroom, the judge greeted her with respect. Alexander was already seated, handcuffed, his face pale and his eyes empty. She didn't look at him immediately. She sat down, breathed, and when the judge asked her to state the facts, she spoke with a firm, clear voice. "On April 12th, at a Vega group party, my husband hit me with a bottle. It was not an accident. It was a public humiliation, and although many saw it, no one spoke. I, however, will speak." The room fell silent. Alexander looked up, trying to find some opening for forgiveness, but there was nothing there. Only a complete woman. When her statement was over, the judge slowly nodded. Navarro gave her an approving look. Diego, from the back, watched her with contained pride. Leaving the courthouse, the air was warm, and the afternoon was beginning to be gilded. In front of the building, a group of women applauded her. Some cried. Others simply looked at her with respect. Clara stopped, surprised. Navarro whispered to her, "You are no longer walking alone." Clara looked at the Miami sky and said with a serene voice, "Then, it was worth it." That night, returning to Tampa, as the train advanced under the stars, she allowed herself to smile for the first time without fear. Through the glass, she saw her reflection, and in it, she found not the victim, but the woman who had survived and spoken. The ocean awaited her, and with it, her new life. Clean. Possible.